I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch, joined once again by Patrick Wyman. And Pat, we have a hell of a fight to talk about this week. I feel like that's how I introduce all of the fights these days, but you could have a lot worse complaints than saying that, man, I just can't stop complimenting these fights. The UFC's relentless schedule of quality combat entertainment continues as we head into January. January 2nd, in fact, I believe, is the date of this fight. And, of course, I'm talking about the welterweight championship bout between Robbie Lawler and Carlos Condit, which is just a stellar matchup. Before we get into that, however, I do want to thank all of the wonderful people who contributed $5 or more to our Patreon during the month of November. We received those at the beginning of December, and we wait for the next month for them to be confirmed. But we really appreciate it. These people, we owe you a debt of gratitude. Ben Cohn, Shane Walsh, Owen, Alex, Chris Reaney, Carl Kalmer, Emil Rainberg, Jorge Cabrera, Thomas Grant, Scott Atkin, Liam Franks, Justin Wilson, Ruben Van Zandvoort, Reed M. Kellner, Adam, and Theodore Bricker. All of you guys, thank you so much. We've reached a total of 246 pledges total for December. We have to, of course, wait to receive those till the month is ended, but we basically doubled the amount of money that we are getting from you guys each month, and we really appreciate it. The show does have production costs, and we appreciate being compensated for our time. We love doing this, and we love seeing how much support you guys give us for continuing to do so. So a big hearty thank you. Everybody who contributed $3 or less, we appreciate that as well. I'm going to get your guys' names up on the Heavy Hands website, short shrift. Try and do that tonight, because I keep forgetting to do it. Robbie Lawler, Carlos Condit. Enough platitudes about our wonderful listeners, Pat. Let's give some platitudes about these wonderful fighters next. What are your general thoughts on this matchup?
This is just violence incarnate. I love everything about this fight.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine. Like, it's not one of those things that makes a ton of sense as a destiny matchup in terms of, like, skill and rankings and all of that crap. But this is as good a fight as we're going to see for the welterweight title. I guess, I mean, the last one was pretty good, but, like, and the last few have been really good. But, like, this is something special from a pure matchup perspective.
Robbie Lawler has yet to be involved in anything less than a very entertaining welterweight title fight. Welterweight fight in general, actually. The man, since returning to the UFC, has just been an incredible fighter to watch, and Carlos Condit has had that reputation for ages. I don't think there's any expectation that will go away anytime soon. And it doesn't make a lot of sense from maybe a matchmaking perspective, but it's one of those fights where the moment it's announced, you don't care at all, because you just have two of the most blood and guts warrior-type fighters. And the other thing is that this fight, we talk about it violence incarnate in the same terms that we talked about a fight like John Lineker versus Francisco Rivera a couple months ago, where it was just a crazy fight between punchers. This one, I think, has that same kind of feeling, but it's an even higher level matchup. Right, it's a considerably more elite matchup between two guys who have established themselves for a very long time now as the very best fighters in their division. And while we may ask some questions about whether or not Carlos Condit is still at that peak level, Robbie Lawler certainly is, and Carlos Condit is always capable of bringing a good fight out of an elite competitor.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are on an exceptionally high technical level. They're operating at an exceptionally high technical level. I think Lawler, especially, Condit, has been operating on this unorthodox and diverse, but extremely effective level for a long time. I think he has made less marked improvements, so the improvements are still there. Like, frankly, looking at his fight with Thiago Alves, from a technical and physical perspective, that was the best Condit had looked in a while, even even in the aftermath of that devastating knee injury. But just like I went to a media day with Condit and Lawler back in October. And I just want to give some of the quotes because like these are not entertaining personalities at all. Like they're not these are not guys who are going to come out and say really intriguing things. But like I got a really interesting sense, I think, for the way that they view fights like this. And this was Condit talking about Lawler McDonald. He said, by Lawler McDonald too, he said, I was impressed and I was entertained by it. Fights like that, when I've been in those really gritty wars, that's what I live for. The true fighters in this sport, we live for that stuff. And I think that really sums up this fight in general. Is that's what both guys want. That's where they feel most comfortable. They don't think that that's anything special to be in that kind of fight. That's just what they want to do. That's the kind of fight they want to be in.
Yeah, both extremely sadomasochistic fighters who love dishing out punishment almost as much as they love taking it. Where you almost, I think Phil McKenzie wrote a piece a while back about Robbie Lawler, or maybe it was even just a comment of his. He always leaves great comments when we do Heavy Hands episodes and things. And Phil said something. He made an observation about how Robbie Lawler almost seems to get bored sometimes when he fights. Where if an opponent is not pushing him. Like, let's take, for example, the 3 middle rounds of the second Johnny Hendricks fight, where he was being picked apart for good portions of those, and then for the 4th round, he was just being kind of out-wrestled. It wasn't like he was really being drubbed. It was like he was tired. The way he exploded in the 5th round of that fight, it was like he was angry about how boring the fight had been. He didn't care that he won so much as he cared that the fight was more fun and more exciting. And in the similar way that he responded after the beating from Rory McDonald and came back and then went on this insane rant after the fight about how he comes to fight and he comes to knock people out and he's going to keep coming and he's just got this gash in his lip and there's just blood flowing all over his face. The gout of blood that he sprayed at Rory McDonald during that stare down in the 4th round. And Carlos Condit just grinning through a mask of blood. These are fighters who love the violent aspect of the sport and love being put through the ringer. And I think that in and of itself, also when you take into account the elite resumes and skill levels these guys have, that just makes it such a fascinating contest because all fighters are a little crazy, I think, but it's very rare to have 2 fighters meeting who are just that determined to have a hard fight.
Well, it's very rare, I think, to have that kind of attitude towards the violent side of combat sports while still having the kind of cerebral approach and attitude that both of these guys do. I think that's what makes this so uncommon is, you know, like Lawler in that conversation back in October and when I interviewed him back in July, like Lawler's a really sharp dude. He's a student of the game, and he thinks of himself in those terms. He's always learning new things. He's very crafty. He's always in dialogue with his coaches. He's a smart fighter, and always has been. And Condit is the same way. Like this is a quote I got from Condit, and this is fantastic. Just because a musician writes a great album doesn't mean they don't want to continue to write great music. For me, this is a creative outlet. Sometimes we're trying to put together the same notes or the same techniques into different combinations to solve different problems. Like they're both smart guys. They both approach the sport in intelligent ways, both with their training and their choice of coaches and training partners and people that they surround themselves with. But they also have this unbelievably gritty and violent side to the way that expresses itself. And that's a really rare combination. It's rare to see that in one fighter, much less in 2. And then to get them matched up for all the marbles for a title it's just a really special thing that we don't see very often.
Yeah, that's why I say that it reminds me of Rivera Lineker in the promise of violence and action, but it's different. It's more than that kind of fight where it's more than just this will be a great slugfest between 2 punchers. It's an elite contest between 2 fighters who despite their intelligence and their craft have a sort of innate appreciation for the art of the brawl, as it were, or the art of the war, and who really appreciate putting on that kind of fight. So why don't we break down... go on.
Well, real quick, it's like, you know, you compare them with somebody like Justin Gaethje, who, God bless him, I love Justin Gaethje. I love everything about his game. But Justin Gaethje does not have that cerebral side to it. He relishes the kind of bloody slugfest. Yeah. But Justin Gaethje is not doing the kind of thinking outside the cage about the game and about his game in particular that somebody like Robbie Lawler and Carlos Condit is.
Sure. And there are people around Justin Gaethje doing that thinking for him. But it's unique to have a fighter who is engaged in that process of crafting himself into a better weapon. And that's both of these guys right here. I absolutely agree. I thought we might talk in depth today and really spend the bulk of our episode breaking down these two fighters because this is such an intriguing fight. It's a great fight card underneath them, kind of a weirdly arrayed one. We've got Poirier-Duffy happening again. But on the Fight Pass prelims, we've got Miocic-Arlovsky, which is a really solid heavyweight fight in the co-main event. And then we've just got kind of a bizarre, spotty mix. Kelvin Gastelum was supposed to fight Kyle Noak, and of course he pulled out of his fight. Somebody else pulled out as well. Who pulled out of a fight?
Gastelum was supposed to fight Noak, and then... God, I don't know. I'm sure there was another one.
It's a weird card for some reason. It looks like half of the card looks like it would be like a regional Australian card or something. You're like, what is? Yeah. Where there's just strange matchups, and then there are other fantastic ones.
The McDonald-Kanahara matchup is very strange. I don't have any idea what to make of that fight aside from let's give Michael McDonald the opportunity to do something violent.
I think it's a worthy test for him to come back. I think Kanahara is a weird fighter and a crafty enough one. But that's I digress. I thought we would talk in depth for most of today's episode about these two guys. And maybe we can start with Carlos Condit, and then in segment 2, we'll try to move on to Robbie Lawler. We can talk not only about what these guys do well, but also maybe try to come up with some sort of a general sense. Neither of us have prepared any 3 keys or anything like that, but we can come up with a general sense for what they need to do to beat one another and what kind of preparations we expect to see from them come Saturday's fight. So Carlos Condit, what's basically sum up Carlos Condit's style in a couple of sentences, and we'll expand from there. What do you see when you see Carlos Condit?
Well, I think I see diversity, creativity, relentless aggression, and above all, pace. Those to me are the keys to Carlos Condit's game, to understanding what he brings to the table. He's going to be constantly attacking. That doesn't mean that he is a straight ahead fighter to the exclusion of everything else. As we have seen from him before, we know that he can do multiple things. We know he can stick and move on the outside. We know he can sit down and counterpunch sometimes. But by and large, Carlos Condit is going to be most happy when he's moving forward, throwing blitzing combinations, pinning you against the fence, and when you just kind of stand there thinking that he's going to stop, that's when he unloads on you. That's Carlos Condit in a nutshell. He's going to turn up the volume, he's going to turn up the output, and he's going to turn up the aggression as the fight wears on. He's a guy who's not even really getting into the swing of things until round 3 or so.
Yeah, absolutely. Carlos Condit is a very weird, unique fighter to me. For fans listening at home, if you like watching Carlos Condit, and if you have blood pumping through your veins, I assume you do, then I would recommend you check out boxer Bobby Chacon, because that's who Carlos Condit reminds me of. Kind of a boxer-puncher, all-rounder sort of style, an intelligent approach, but weird and unorthodox at the same time. I see him as a very analytical, smart, adaptable fighter, but he doesn't have the kind of smooth defensive savvy you expect when you hear someone labeled with those traits. You know what I mean? He's not like... I don't know, who's an MMA? I can think of a lot of boxing examples, but who's an MMA example? Like an Anderson Silva, right? Where Anderson Silva is he's a very analytical fighter who finds his openings and adapts as the fight goes on, but he is going to leave his foot off the gas until it's time to apply that pressure, and he's going to find those openings through a very steady, or like a Jose Aldo, right? Find those openings and adjustments through a very steady, methodical process. Carlos Condit seems to find a lot of his adjustments by putting himself through the ringer and discovering almost through negative enforcement what doesn't work, and then trying new things until he finds what does work. And he's got such a deep bag of tools. He's got such a diverse skill set, and the chin and the durability and the intelligence to mix up his weapons when one thing isn't working, that this works for him. But it's still such an oddball approach to adaptive fighting. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, let me bounce this off you, Connor. I was kind of... These threads were coming together in my mind as you were talking here. Mm-hmm. I think that Carlos Condit, for the most part, is a cerebral fighter who does his thinking not during the fight itself, but in the spaces between. I think that Condit prepares in really, really intelligent ways. And I think that between rounds, he does a lot of thinking and adjusting. I think as the round is going itself, I don't think that he does a lot of adjusting. I think he comes out with a new plan at the beginning of every round and then kind of tries it, makes some adjustments as time goes on. But really, I don't think he's one of those guys where you see the wheels turning in the midst of the fight.
That makes a ton of sense to me. I think I can just as you say it, I think I can fully and completely agree without a second thought. And I think this is kind of an expansion of the rote striker concept that we have talked about so much in the past. We've for people who aren't familiar with this, we got a lot of new listeners because of our big fights that happened recently, so welcome to Heavy Hands. If you're not familiar with all the terms that we throw out there, we talk about rote strikers and natural strikers or organic strikers. And the difference being that rote strikers tend to have, and this is in some sense an artificial distinction, but one that we find helpful. And rote strikers tend to have sort of set patterns, set combinations. You can almost see them hitting the mitts while they're pursuing their opponent, where they throw a 1-2 and then a left uppercut instead of a hook because they know that the head might come down, not necessarily because they see the head coming down. Or maybe because their coaches told them the head's coming down, and so they throw that combination with the rhythm that they trained on the pads. And these things have to be really drilled into these fighters. Whereas the organic strikers tend to, and I think we'll probably talk about that when we come to Robbie Lawler, the organic strikers tend to make the adjustments on the fly, not only mid-combination, but mid-punch, changing trajectories and adapting the next punch to what the response of the opponent has been to the first punch. So if they duck the jab outside, they're not going to follow up with the same left hook because their head's not in position. They're going to follow up with an overhand right because that's the punch that makes sense next. And so basically for Carlos Condit, he's a rote striker who is still remarkably good at making the adjustments when they're pointed out to him or when he has a moment to breathe and think about what he's seen. But in the moment, he does tend, and I think that's probably why he gets hit so early, so much early and often in his fights, because he's going out there with set patterns. They're not necessarily organically set up all the time. He puts himself in a lot of odd positions, but just having all those odd positions in his arsenal gives him a lot of new things to try as the fight goes on, as his coaches point out to him that all the stuff that got him hit in the first round isn't working.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case, and it makes for a really interesting matchup here with Robbie Lawler, who is almost the definition of an organic striker.
Yeah.
So to kind of build on that a little bit, like with Condit, the combination that he hit Thiago Alves with, that upward arcing elbow, was a combination that he drilled literally shot for shot on the pads with Brandon Gibson repeatedly before that fight, because he and Gibson looked at I'm sure they watched the film together, because that's a thing that Gibson does with his fighters. I'm sure they watched Thiago Alves' film together. They picked that out, and I actually asked Brandon Gibson about this. They picked that out based on a couple of Alves' tendencies, like especially the way that he positions his guard and his tendency to pull his head off to that side when he throws the counter left hook that he likes. So they planned that in advance, knowing what Thiago Alves' tendencies were, and then when the opportunity was there, Condit threw that particular combination. So there was a trigger for it, but Condit knew beforehand how he wanted to exploit that, and his coaches knew how they wanted to exploit that. And when you have the kind of coaches that Carlos Condit does, who are really, really good at running through all these possibilities beforehand and then working them relentlessly in the gym, and then their pattern recognition is so good that they can spot these things during the fight and call out adjustments as the fight goes on or between rounds, then it makes for a really interesting pairing of coach and fighter that's really effective, and we've seen how effective it's been in the past.
Right, and it's Condit in that way is very coachable, but he has to be, as you said, he has to be coached very intelligently for that to happen, because you can imagine Carlos Condit with a different coach other than Brandon Gibson, and I do think that Mike Winkeljohn has worked really well with Carlos Condit in the past. I think Condit really gets Winkeljohn's weird, eclectic, eccentric style of striking, and Winkeljohn's always been very good at pointing out openings for, the left head kick or the left hook or whatever needs to come in to capitalize on the openings between rounds. But Brandon Gibson, I think, is a fantastic match for him, because we've got a guy here who's looking at these things and planning, as you said, very specific sequences. And so you can imagine Carlos Condit, without that kind of preparation, being beaten by the Thiago Alves that showed up in their last fight in May, right? Because Alves was having a very good night. He was looking very sharp. He was in good form, landing a lot of counters early, as happens in most of Condit's fight. And you can pretty easily picture Condit without that kind of coaching not knowing what to do next, or even just a Condit who didn't have perhaps the right combination prepared. So he's really a fighter who thrives on good coaching and good tape study, good scouting, good preparation, and intelligent preparation in order to enable his style.
Yeah, and it clearly works for him. Like he's clearly doing good things, and he's still getting better. That's the thing that really amazes me. That for a guy who's 13 years into his career at this point, who's got 38 professional fights under his belt,
taking a lot of punishment,
is still making improvements.
And he's taking a lot of punishment too.
Yeah, there's a lot of mileage on him, but I think this is what happens when you take a guy who's naturally really durable. You put him in a camp surrounded by the right coaches for a really long time. He takes care of himself. He doesn't get out of shape ever. Like I asked him whether it made a difference that he was fighting after Christmas, or somebody asked him this, and his response was like, "No, I don't gorge myself anyway. Like, why would that make a difference to me? That this is coming after the holidays."
Almost incredulous that it possibly could make a difference.
Yeah, that I think it blows his mind that there are fighters out there who don't just do the right thing all the time.
Sure.
You know,
yeah.
Like, you can see how for Carlos Condit, he would be like, "What do you mean you missed weight?" Like,
you know,
my
my boxing mentor Luis, he calls fighters like this cyborgs. He's got a guy that he works with who he thinks is the same way, who you just tell him to do something and doesn't tend to do as well when he has to think constantly on the fly. You just drill the right things into him and he just goes. Doesn't complain about being tired. And this guy, I think he listens to the show. I think Mike listens to the show. And so talking to Mike, his mentality, it's at once, I think he's probably similar to Condit, because it's at once uplifting and inspiring and just crushingly, it just makes you feel like garbage about yourself. Because I have no problem getting out of shape, because, boy, not working out is an awful lot easier than working out, Pat. Mike's mentality is just so analytical, where he's like, oh, it's a lot harder to get back in shape than it is to stay in shape, so I just stay in shape so it's easier. Like, yeah, that makes so much sense. Why can't my lazy ass think of things in the same way? It's just it's a cyborg's way of viewing fighting. Condit strikes me as a similar kind of guy.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's very much the impression I've gotten from the conversations I've had with and around him. Like, it just makes perfect sense. But he's a really excellent fighter, and what was really striking to me watching that fight with Alves was how good he looked physically in that. Like, he was sitting down on his punches in a way that he really hasn't in a long time. I mean, aside from very specific instances, like when Martin Kampmann was tired at the end of that fight, then Condit was sitting down on his punches the way that he used to when he was in the WEC. But that he really hasn't, for the most part, since that Diaz fight.
You think maybe Gibson's bringing that back into his game?
Yeah, I think it's experience too, in terms of just getting used to when is the right time to do that. When is the right time to sit down?
Sure.
Because when he fought Tyron Woodley, like, Condit didn't have much on really any of the shots that he was throwing. It didn't seem to me, at least.
And that's often been a problem for him since coming to the UFC. It's just having this really upright style, similar to Holly Holm. I've criticized her punching mechanics in the past, where it's, rather than sitting down, you're always looking for the next angle or the next strike before you've even completed the strike. So it's like every strike's a setup, or every strike is a preparation for something else. It's like pulling your punches while thinking of what you're going to do afterward. And it really helps to be able to sit down in a few and maybe you pull some Nick Diaz style, but you're still going to really rip at least a few of them, because you got to make them count. And that's what Condit did in the Kampmann fight with his left hooks. Definitely did it in the Alves fight. I think he's really improved his left hand, left elbow too. The follow-ups to his right hands, where he's no longer overextending himself so much. I have an idea. Why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, maybe we can try and use this episode as a way to look at the bright and the dark sides of both of these fighters. So we've addressed basically the adaptability, the durability, the things that are the best aspects of Carlos Condit. Perhaps after the break, we can talk about what we think are his biggest weaknesses. And then we can do the same for Robbie Lawler, and then talk about how they can augment their best qualities while shielding their worst qualities from one another at the end of that next segment. So let's do that when we come back from this break. Okay, wait, stop. Don't skip this break. I know you skip most of them. It's a podcast. It's not a radio show. You don't have to listen to the commercials. But if you follow my very simple instructions, you'll be doing a huge service to Heavy Hands, Pat, and myself. First, go to Stitcher.com or iTunes.com. You can use either of those services to subscribe to the show, which makes it really, really easy to listen to every episode and not have to go hunting for it on our confusing, badly designed website. Once you're there, give us a positive rating and a positive review. That means go to the little 5-star thing and click on the star all the way to the right. That's a 5-star rating. That's the best one you could possibly give us, and like 20 or 30 words about how you enjoy the show. It may not seem like much, but it's a huge help to us, and we really appreciate it. It helps us bring Heavy Hands to an ever-increasing audience, which is just good for everybody. So thank you for listening. Please take the time to give us a positive rating and review. Next time that you're on at your computer, at your phone, whatever, iTunes.com, Stitcher.com, search for Heavy Hands, give a positive rating and a review. Thank you. And now, back to the show. And we are back. Carlos Condit's worst trait. What do you consider that to be, Pat?
I think it's probably his subpar defense. I think in every phase, I think Condit is not anything better than average defensively. Mm-hmm. On the feet, he has a really bad habit of throwing his combinations and then just stopping in front of his opponent, which leaves him really vulnerable to opponents who are willing to hang in the pocket and counter him. That's gotten him in trouble on a whole bunch of different occasions. Even against George St. Pierre, who wasn't like a huge counter puncher, was able to lace Condit with a couple of really good hard counters. Mm-hmm. I think he doesn't really pull his head offline all the time as he throws, which again leaves his head right there to be countered. So if you're willing to bang it out with Carlos Condit, you have a pretty good shot of being able to land good shots on him. Yeah. Like, the problem is, can you do that for longer than he can? Because there's a good chance that he's going to be able to take those shots he's going to be able to take those shots from you.
He's probably got one of the best chins in MMA history.
Yeah. Oh, unbelievable chin. By far one of the best, especially considering the quality of some of the punchers that he's fought over the years.
Right.
Like
Tyron Woodley, Johnny Hendricks, Dan Hardy, solid puncher, Jake Ellenberger. He's fought a lot of hard hitters and pretty much, he went down a lot in the Jake Ellenberger fight, but he went down about 4 times and still ended up taking a split decision, which just shows you how durable he is.
Yeah, and so I think that's the big one. He's also got, kind of bad, kind of mystifyingly bad takedown defense, though he makes up for that with his guard, and he really likes to get in these scrambles. So he'll get taken down and then he'll work a sit out and then he'll try and initiate a scramble, or he'll get taken down and then he'll try to hit the switch and then he'll try and initiate a scramble, or he'll get on his back, he'll get to his butterfly guard or something, and then he'll try and work a sweep or to initiate a scramble. But it's a scramble heavy style that just skips the part where he works really hard to defend the takedown.
It's weird, isn't it? Because he has good wrestling and good jiu-jitsu. Where you see him on the ground, he scrambles well, and he works for position. I think that's something he's improved a lot in recent years, in particular. But he just seems to have put no effort into stopping the takedown in the first place. Or, I don't know. Maybe he's put a ton of work in it, and it just doesn't click for some reason. But it's very strange.
Yeah, there are always going to be some fighters who, for whatever reason, a certain thing just doesn't make a lot of sense to them, or they just can't ever quite get it. I think for him, because his stance is so upright, and because he kind of overextends on a lot of the shots that he throws, he's always going to be vulnerable to takedowns, because he's just giving his opponents, the position to get in on his hips in the first place, right? So, if you let your opponent start in on your hips, unless you're some freak like Chad Mendez or Jose Aldo or one of those fighters, your opponents are going to be able to get you down if they're in on your hips. It's just a fact. It's just a fact of life. So by giving them that position in the first place, I kind of wonder if Condit just doesn't think okay, well, when we get to the ground, that's when I really start going. And it also forces his opponents to work. It wears them down in ways that it really doesn't for him, a guy who just has endless cardio. Yeah. So there's a logic to it, but still, it's a weakness when you've got really strong top players. Not that Robbie Lawler fits that description, but it's still a problem.
Maybe he feels that maybe it's because he's not a very adaptive, on-the-fly kind of fighter. So maybe he's actually come to a conscious decision that actively trying to sprawl on every takedown will take away from his ability to just let his combinations go on the feet, to play out those kind of scripted, rote approaches to striking. If he's worried about what might happen in the middle of one, then he won't be able to let his hands go. So maybe he has just decided in his head, he and his coaches, I'm going to get taken down, but I have to be able to pull the trigger. and we can adjust to the takedowns between rounds, especially in 5-round fights like this. That's a lot of time to adjust. And when you work on your defensive wrestling off of your back, it doesn't become as big of a problem. And when you've got a great guard, it doesn't become as big of a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the work of keeping his opponents at distance and picking and choosing his spots the way that he has, especially in the last few years, has made that much less of a problem than it was in the past, because he's limited the spots in which he's vulnerable to getting taken down in the first place. Sure,
that makes sense. For me, I think I would go one step beyond just saying that his defense is poor, which it definitely is. I think for me, for Condit's worst trait, I have to identify the cause of what I think is the cause of most of his bad defensive habits. And aside from maybe what might be a mental block to just fighting organically, I think it has to be his footwork, which is just weird. And it's very weird. We talked on last week's episode about Gino Dos Santos' footwork. Condit's isn't bad in the way that Dos Santos' is. Condit has a lot of ways out of certain situations. He has a lot of knowledge on how to escape and how to take angles. And he's often very tricky as a result. Anybody who saw the Nick Diaz fight couldn't say that he doesn't have functional footwork. He definitely got away from an effective, experienced swarmer pressure type fighter and did very well fighting off the back foot. But coming forward, Condit tends to get his feet into a lot of weird positions. He tends to use a lot of shifts, and I think people are really in love with shifts lately. There's a boxing video out there. I wish I knew who did it. It was like Wilson Caden or someone who did the Lost Art of Shifting. Do you know what video I'm talking about?
Yes, vaguely.
It talks about, I think, Roberto Duran and Gennady Golovkin, The Lost Art of Shifting. It's by Rusalka Afterglow. So it's a solid video. Somebody wants to check it out. Nice little bit of analysis. But it's got this kind of mystifying quality, I think, as like an antique technique that's awesome. It allows you to cover distance and take an angle while adding power to your other hand. But it can also be a crutch. And I think a lot of people tend to identify someone just overextending themselves as shifting, because what happens when you overextend on a right hand, for example, is your weight leaves your back foot entirely and you're now balanced over one leg, and then your back foot drifts forward to catch yourself. And that is not so much a shift as it is just bad or maybe just idiosyncratic punching mechanics. Condit does a lot of that, and he uses these movements. He sets up kicks with them, but I think this is what leads him to what you identified of him just standing in front of his opponent a lot after he lands, is because he's putting his feet out of position as he throws, and then if you're not backing up anymore, he can't transition that weird foot position into something else. He can't keep marching forward and add a kick onto the end of it, or add another punch, or add an elbow, or come off to the side. He's just kind of standing in front of you, either looking like he's standing on a skateboard, or with his feet completely square. And that's a bad position to be in. And I think that's what makes him so hittable, and probably why he does tend to get knocked down or staggered by really heavy hitters like Tyron Woodley and Johnny Hendricks and Jake Ellenberger. The guy's obviously incredibly durable, unbelievably so, and I think that's a saving grace for him. But he ends up needing that durability a lot more, because he puts himself in these positions where, unless you're giving him space, he just can't stop from being hit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It's effective footwork without necessarily being the most technically sound footwork.
Yeah, I would call it functional, but flawed.
Or actually, maybe this is the case where we draw that distinction between footwork and movement again. Like, I think Condit has really great awareness of where he is in the cage and moves well, but the individual pieces that make up that movement are exploitable.
Right, where if Condit, he knows how to move laterally and when to do it, but is he pivoting well? Is he taking small, little, efficient angles? Not necessarily. Not all the time.
Yeah. So I agree with you on that. But so let's move on to Robbie Lawler here. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the biggest strengths of Robbie Lawler's game?
Robbie Lawler is he's one of my goddamn favorite fighters to watch and talk about. I love Robbie Lawler, and I think he's maybe not as accessible for casual fans as Carlos Condit, because Condit is always in these blood and guts wars. While Lawler is too, Lawler also has a very cerebral side, and he looks more like what you expect when you call a fighter cerebral. We just got done saying how, yes, Condit's intelligent, but he doesn't really fight like it. Lawler still appreciates the back and forth war and everything, as we said at the start of the episode, but he'll also pick somebody apart. He will take them to pieces from range. He's got a very educated jab. What I love most about Lawler is it's hard to even pick one thing. We'll do a few things. I think that's fine. We did for Condit. I love the subtle aspects of Robbie Lawler's game more than anything, because he's a big puncher. He gets into bloody fights. There's all of these really big, dramatic things to appreciate. So I think it's really fun to look at that giant, just violent cacophony and notice, it's like a really subtle performance in like a Michael Bay movie, right? Where just there's explosions and cars flipping, and then like somebody like Michael Fassbender standing there putting on the most brilliant performance in the back corner. And so finding it's a lot of fun. For Robbie Lawler, one of the real subtleties that stands out is his upper body movement, which is something he does a lot better than almost any other fighter in MMA. I wouldn't call him a perfect defensive fighter. In fact, he tends to get hit fairly often when he's in there with a really solid counterpuncher or just a capable striker in general. But he's one of the best in the sport at moving with his opponent's punches and riding them to set up his counters. He does a fantastic job of pulling and slipping. And what I mean by slipping is where your head will shift over one foot or the other, and you use that by folding one hip or the other hip. You kind of just fold in half very slightly at the middle, and your head slides outside the punch. Lawler does that brilliantly. And then pulling, where he will take his head from front to back. And often Lawler will add, I've heard it called a shoulder roll. I don't really think he does a shoulder roll, but he does kind of tend to bring his shoulder in front of his chin and block punches with his shoulder before lunging back forward with his left hand. Or he will carry his right hook along back with him as he pulls. And he's got this nice little serpentine kind of movement of shifting back and forth, weight constantly going from one side to the other, and it's so wonderfully incorporated with his punches because he's such a heavy puncher with either hand. It's fantastic to have this defensive movement that leads into those attacks.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Would you say it's fair to say that while Robbie Lawler is often there to be hit and he is hittable, it's much more difficult than you would think to hit him cleanly?
Yes, where it's a very stark contrast to Carlos Condit, who is almost renowned for his hitability. Robbie Lawler often, even when he looks like he's being hit hard, if you watch it in slow motion replay, you're like, he actually took most of the sting off that punch. That happens a lot in his fights.
It's the subtle head movement. It's the ability to hide his chin behind his shoulder. He has very active hands, so there's a lot of parries. There's a lot of blocks that serve, if not to make the shot fully miss, at least to deflect it and take some of the sting off. He has an incredible command of distance, and so a lot of shots. I noticed this a lot when he was fighting Rory McDonald. A lot of McDonald's right hands caught him right at the very end of the path of the punch, so that took off most of the snap.
Yeah, and I think in the commentary for that fight, Joe Rogan was criticizing Rory McDonald. And I'm not criticizing Joe Rogan, but he was pointing it out as if it was Rory's fault. I think it's deceptively difficult to judge your distance and actually punch through your target when that target is Robbie Lawler. I think he's very good at making you think his head is closer than it is and then pulling it just too far away to actually connect with force.
Yeah, it's a very, very subtle and extremely high-level defense that's particularly well-suited for the moment that we're in MMA right now. Because we've seen a renewed emphasis on fighting in the pocket in the last couple of years, a skill that for a long time just didn't really exist in MMA. And Robbie Lawler, I think, is its finest practitioner. That Lawler succeeded in dragging a defined outfighter and somebody whose coach was trying to get him to stick and move and not fight in the pocket and explicitly said, I don't want you fighting him in the pocket between rounds, to fight him in the pocket at various points in that fight. Robbie Lawler was able to drag Rory McDonald into into exchanges that really were not in McDonald's best interest at all. But he did that because of his command of distance and because of his footwork and because of all these subtle little things that he does to convince you to engage in that type of fight. Like, we talked about Carlos Condit's movement and footwork and the distinction between the two. Robbie Lawler is excellent at both. Robbie Lawler has really outstanding footwork, such that he's constantly cutting these little angles, these subtle little things that you don't necessarily notice, but then he clips his opponent with a right hook, and you realize that because of this little outside step that he took, or this little inside step that he took, that his opponent never saw the right hook coming at all. Like, it just was not visible from the angle that he was throwing.
Yeah, or the left uppercut is often very similar. Sometimes like a rising left hook, some people call a shovel punch. He's got a very sneaky way of throwing his counters, not only to adapt to where the opponent's head is or the body if he's striking at the body, but to make it so that they just can't see it coming from their position.
It's a really, really high-level set of tricks that he employs. And that's the thing about Lawler at this stage in his career, is that he has so many of those.
Yeah.
It's not just that he has 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 things that he's really good at. It's that he's great at all of them. So he excels at setting a rhythm. He's got a fantastic rhythm. I think like him and Mark Hunt are the guys that this always really stands out to me with. I think because they've got so much experience in striking at a high level and so many years under their belt and so many years in the gym, that he'll kind of tap away with this jab, and then he'll throw a full power jab, and then he'll tap with it again. And then out of nowhere comes this blazing left hand that, because he's habituated you to the tapping speed of his jab, you just don't see it coming. You don't see it coming. It's like a baseball pitcher who uses his fastball and his changeup in conjunction with one another to set you up. Lawler does that beautifully. He's got the layers of defense. He's got the subtle footwork and the angles. He's got his ability to set the distance that he wants to be at. Even against taller fighters, he's capable of doing that. Mm-hmm. And so all of these things play together into this really, really dangerous package that has absolutely nothing flashy about it. Like, aside from the power is still there's flash there, but there's nothing flashy at all about his shot selection or his techniques or anything. It's just he's a really, really good fighter.
Yeah, it's meat and potatoes. He just throws what works. It's, once again, a stark contrast to Carlos Condit. I'm glad that you mentioned the rhythm, because I have to mention that as well with Robbie Lawler. I think it's just so fascinating to watch him. You can watch a Robbie Lawler fight, or you can watch one sequence where he lands a clean punch. Just rewind 10 seconds and then watch it over and over and over, and watch the way that he kind of sets this tempo of movement, either by touching his opponent. One of the ways I recently noticed from him is that he'll set a tempo with his feet. A lot of times bouncy footwork is bad. It can give the opponent your rhythm, but Lawler knows that. And so he uses his own brand of bouncy footwork in the way that a lot of great Russian boxers do, where he'll kind of, or Cuban boxers like Teofilo Stevenson used to do this, or Mantequilla. Good boxers would from the Eastern Bloc or the Soviet school of boxing would use this kind of bouncy fencer-like movement to draw you in. Because I'm trying to find a good way to phrase this. It looks like movement that can be timed, and so when you let someone think that you can be timed, you can time them trying to time you. And that's what Robbie Lawler does so well, where he'll bounce back and forth just outside of range, same beat, forward step, backward step, forward step, backward step, often just moving his front foot and pulling his head back, making it look like he's coming in and out. And so then the opponent tries to time him when he's coming in, or maybe they try to follow him when he's coming out. His feet are actually still in a good position, and he knows that they are trying to time that bouncy movement because he's using it to lull them into this tempo, and then he changes as they come in. Then he steps off on an angle because he's balanced and ready. He's not locked into this bouncy movement. He only lets the opponent think he is. It's just so brilliant and incredible to watch. And to know that a guy does this just kind of naturally without thinking, just because of years and years of experience. He just pulls all these tricks out on the fly. But unlike Carlos Condit, they're all just small, subtle things. He adjusts on the fly very, very well. And so I think what makes this fight so fascinating is we have these two great adaptive fighters with completely different approaches to mid-fight adjustments.
Yeah, as far as rhythm is concerned, I asked Lawler about that, and Lawler is totally aware of it and how to manipulate it.
I love that. I love that he thinks about it.
Oh yeah, he's totally aware of it. It's absolutely a thing that he thinks about and that he works on, and it's a thing that he studies when he's watching tape. He tries to figure out the other guy's rhythm and how he can go about exploiting that. Like, it's a pleasure to talk a game with Robbie Lawler. It really is. He's a sharp dude. Yeah,
crazy intelligent and insanely good at the thinking side and the physical side of this sport. Okay, so worst thing. Worst thing about Robbie Lawler. I'm going to make you go first, Pat. What do you think?
What do I think is the worst thing about Robbie Lawler? I think it's his tendency to kind of get bored sometimes, and to maybe overthink things. We don't talk about it so much because he won the fight and because he knocked out Rory McDonald and because it turned into such a banger in the later rounds. But he basically gave away the first round of that fight, kind of measuring and thinking and figuring out where Rory McDonald was going to be and so on and so forth. And he knew that he was giving it away, and he was fine with that. Because, again, this was a thing that came up at that media day, and he's like, yeah, no, I knew I probably lost the round, and I was okay with it because I think it told me what I needed to know later on. But the fact that he's so okay with that, and he's so comfortable with that, and he's so fine with the idea of giving away chunks of fights because he thinks it'll benefit him later, like, he can just give away a fight doing exactly that against a guy who's durable enough to withstand it, and against a guy maybe like Carlos Condit who's going to be able to turn it up later in the fight. Like, that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm. And it almost bit him. It probably bit him the first time against Johnny Hendricks, that exact trait. Most of us expected it to bite him the second time around. It very nearly bit him against Rory McDonald, and almost in the first round against Matt Brown as well. Where I agree. By the way, I agree. I know it's kind of lame to just have the same point, but maybe I should have gone first because I was going to say the same thing. I already mentioned it earlier in the show where Robbie just seems to... Yeah, sometimes it's boredom, I think. Sometimes I really do think he's just not having fun because the opponent is trying to take the fight out of the fight, and Robbie Lawler wants it to be a fight. And a lot of the smartest fighters out there will you have a term for this, don't you, Pat? What have you said before in the past about taking the fight out of the fight? Is that it?
Oh, no, I think I stole that from somebody. That's not my phrase, but I have used it.
There's another phrase that you use, too, very regularly to describe things. Maybe I'm
process-oriented type of thing? Or?
Maybe. But either way, what it is a lot of fighters, like Mark Lehman comes up with a game plan for Johnny Hendricks. It's going to be, in a lot of respects, a safety-first game plan. It's going to be, how do we take away what that guy does well? Or fighting a GSP. He's going to try to take all of the competitive aspects out because smart fighters, normal fighters, don't want competitive fights. They don't want to have to adjust on the fly. Robbie Lawler is a lot more like Jose Aldo in this regard, where he likes having things to react to on the fly. And when he doesn't have those things, when someone just comes out doing the same thing and they're doing the safest thing possible, like Johnny Hendricks diving on takedowns for an entire round in their rematch, he just waits for the openings to come back again. And yeah, he tends to give away rounds doing that against good fighters. He gave away rounds against Rory. He gave away rounds against Hendricks. In a sense, I love this about Robbie Lawler. I love that he's willing to give away rounds. I love that he plays these gambits where you're going to lose that round while you're measuring, but you might be able to capitalize in a really big way later. And he's so remarkably good at what he does that it pays off. But it's maybe not the smartest, most consistent way to fight. And so it's always kind of a tightrope walk in his bouts, especially with these really tough, durable, equally, if not identically, adaptable fighters like Carlos Condit.
Yeah, because the contrast between the way that Robbie Lawler gives away a round and the way that somebody like John Jones might give away a round is that Jones is still doing damage while he's doing it. Like, Jones gave away a round against Daniel Cormier, basically eating some headshots in the clinch, in return for landing just brutal knees to the body over and over and over again, knowing that Cormier was landing the flashier shots there, but that it was going to drain Cormier for the later rounds. So that was a trade-off that Jones made, knowing the precise way in which it was going to pay off later, whereas Lawler's gambits are much less guaranteed to result in the kind of outcome that he wants.
And it's fair, right? I think Jose Aldo kind of broke his normal mold when he went for that big right hand fake to the left hook against Conor McGregor. That's a very un-Jose Aldo-in punch because, and while you and I agree it's a smart setup, The problem with it is that Aldo didn't judge what McGregor's reaction to the fake right hand would be. He merely tried to disguise his hook without first determining if it was a safe feint to sell. So it makes sense to try and judge these openings before you try to attack them. Before you're trying to do damage, you need to determine what's the best way to do that damage. But, you lose rounds as a result. You just end up losing rounds. And I think Condit probably doesn't think about it much either, but Condit's style is much more suited to banking rounds because he's there to be hit. And so he can lose the rounds a lot more spectacularly than Robbie Lawler, like against Woodley, like against Hendricks in the first round. But he throws a lot more volume, and he's always there and keeps coming. So he's a very unmissable presence in the cage. Where Robbie Lawler's subtleties, they can be overlooked. Even like the first round of that first Johnny Hendricks fight, I think there's a really strong argument for giving it to Robbie Lawler, but nobody did. Because, it was a close round and Hendricks was doing the fancier looking stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. It's weird that, like, I talk a lot about process on this show because I think it's a really important thing, and I think it's a really important way to think about large numbers of fights spread over the course of years, like you and I do. That if you want to know who's going to win the fight the most number of times, you want to look at the kind of underlying things that win fights, and the big one is volume. That if you land more strikes, if you throw more strikes, you're more likely to win fights. And Carlos Condit does that. He also has incredible killer instinct, so it's not but even if those fights were going to decisions, like his fight against Martin Kampmann, that's still probably Carlos Condit's fight.
Yes,
definitely. So that's when we say process, that's the kind of thing that we mean. Robbie Lawler has a very sound underlying process too, but it's not necessarily one that banks him rounds on the way to winning a decision.
It's a process that suits his strengths, but not one that is designed to suit the sport. It's not designed to win rounds. It's designed to set up knockouts. And you love that about Robbie Lawler, but it is also in some ways a flaw. So,
he's gotten much better about scoring in recent years. And I think that the big change there has been his jab and how much more active his jab is, that he'll score with his jab and score with his jab and score with his jab. And that front kick he likes to throw sometimes too. That he's not always looking for the killer shot. He's more willing to throw volume and land volume and take rounds. But still, against Carlos Condit, you can easily see how the older version of Robbie Lawler, the one that showed up for large stretches of the fight against Rory McDonald, could lose himself a 5-round decision there.
Absolutely, no disagreement. Well, why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, we'll have a few minutes left to talk about 2 of the other fights on the card that we're really looking forward to, those being Lorenz Larkin versus Albert Tumanov. Both of us are salivating in case you can't hear that through the mics. And also one that we talked about already on a prior episode, that would be Heavy Hands 74, Joe Duffy versus Dustin Poirier, which is, as I said, curiously taking place on the Fight Pass prelims, but is still a fantastic fight worthy of main eventing a small card. So,
well, before we hop into that, just real quick, do you have a prediction for this fight, Connor? Lawler Condit?
The good call. I think Robbie Lawler is going to win it. I think Robbie Lawler by decision. I think it's damn near. Actually, you know what? Robbie Lawler by late knockout. Everybody gets knocked out at some point. Even Robbie Lawler's been knocked out, and that's not an easy thing to do. So I think Lawler could be the first man to actually, at the very least, force a stoppage over Carlos Condit. Fourth round.
I'm very much on the same page. I won't be quite so bold. I'll take a decision, but I just think Lawler is doing things in the striking realm that are on a whole other level right now. I think he hits so much harder. His command of distance means I think that he'll be able to fight much more at his preferred pace than the pace that Condit would like to force. And I think he can bank the early rounds while Condit's kind of getting unspooled. Mm-hmm. So that's my thought process. I could easily see Condit exploiting maybe the fact that Lawler has been in some wars lately, and maybe he's the first guy since Nick Diaz to knock out Robbie Lawler. But I lean very slightly toward Lawler, and I think this is probably his fight.
Yeah, despite what we said about the banking rounds, for some reason this feels like a fight that Condit needs to win by knockout if he's going to win. And while I could see that happening, I think it's Lawler's in the moment, on the fly, seat of his pants fighting ability, where he can just adjust to things as they happen, that gives him a pretty distinct edge, because he is the most skilled, most dangerous striker to have that kind of ability that Carlos Condit will have ever faced.
Absolutely. Also, we talked a lot about the quality of Condit's coaching. shout out to Robbie Lawler's coaches who have done amazing work with him since he moved to American Top Team. Like that dude is incredibly well coached, and this struck me as I was rewatching Lawler McDonald 2 today and watching some of the work in the corner. Wow, God, those guys have their heads screwed on straight, and they know exactly what they're dealing with in that fighter.
Really intelligent coaching. I want to find out actually what some of their names are.
His striking coach for a long time has been Matt Pena, but that was the guy he had with him when he was, like, for years now. Matt Pena's been with him. He's got, I think, an Iranian wrestling coach.
Yes, I know the guy's name. I've got it here. His name...
Kami Barzini, is that right?
That's it, Kami Barzini, I think, yep.
Who's excellent, really outstanding. He had King Mo in his corner. And I think he's had Ricardo Laborio, though I don't know if Laborio was in his corner for his last fight.
Barzini, I think, seems to be like his go-to head coach. The guy who gives him the most of his advice and is always with him in training. Mm-hmm. I wonder why that is. Big wrestling focus for Robbie Lawler, I guess.
Yeah. Well, for his last couple of fights, it makes a lot of sense, right? That he was fighting Rory McDonald and Johnny Hendricks.
Yeah, maybe it'll be somebody else this time.
Yeah, but at any rate, just wanted to shout that out there because those guys have done amazing.
No, it's a very good shout, and I appreciate you pointing it out. And pointing out that we needed to make predictions for the fight that we spent the entire episode discussing.
You just completely forgot about it.
So Robbie Lawler wins. That's what both of us think. When we come back, we'll talk about Joe Duffy versus Dustin Poirier and Lorenz Larkin versus Albert Tumanov after this break. Okay, so here's another way you can help us out. Go to your couch, lift up the cushions, and scrounge around in the creases for change, lint, like bent paper clips, like a thumbtack that you stab your thumb on and then you scream alone in your living room. Throw all the stuff out except the change. All right, now take that and deposit it into your bank account or your PayPal account. Head over to heavyhandspodcast.com and click on the donate button on the right side of your screen. Whatever money you just found, which you weren't using anyway, send it to us, all right? Because Pat and I will use it. That money helps us keep this show on the air and free of charge, which is great for you. It's great for us because that way we're making a little bit of money. The donations are a huge deal for us. So please go to heavyhandspodcast.com. Any spare change that you might have lying around, hit the donate button on the right side of the screen and send it our way to help us keep this show live. Thanks. And now back to Heavy Hands. Okay, so very quickly, Pat, let's give our rundown of what you and I both agree are the two other best fights on this card. Why don't we first do Dustin Poirier versus Joe Duffy? This is one that, of course, we already discussed in length on an episode that I chose to title Joe Duffy's Boxing Revolution, because we both talked about how different Joe Duffy's boxing, which was honed in real, actual professional boxing, how different it is from most of the striking and hand throwing you see in the rest of MMA.
Yeah, I'm a big Joe Duffy fan. I really like his game, and I really like his striking game in particular. I think it's a really excellent and kind of not seen all that often in MMA kind of thing. In particular, he's got a great jab, like a really, really, really excellent jab, but he's also very diverse. There's a lot of things that he can do. He's a highly organic striker. He works at a great pace. I'm a big fan of him. I think he does a lot of things really well.
I agree, and I think he does a lot of the things well that we mentioned earlier about Robbie Lawler. Really good distance management, good understanding of how to play with that distance, not just controlling it, but letting the opponent have certain impressions about what that distance is like. He can pressure well, he can counterpunch well, he's got really nice head movement that he really relies on and knows how to use in the context of a fight, and he has a very aggressive countering game based off of that head movement. He sometimes overextends himself and stuff, but great fighters do this. Great fighters throw themselves away from their feet sometimes when they really feel that a punch is there. And Joe Duffy boxes like a really great boxer, and then you add into that his venomous submission grappling, which is weirdly situated in the background, I think, of Japanese jiu-jitsu.
Japanese jiu-jitsu, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, very unorthodox for an MMA fighter, but he's a great submission grappler, very good positional grappling, great back takes, solid wrestling to accompany that. Then he's training with Firas Zahabi at TriStar MMA. What is not to like about Joe Duffy? The thing is last time we both picked him to beat Dustin Poirier. And I was a little wishy-washier than you because I have a lot of respect for the dangerousness of Dustin Poirier's game. He's a lot more hittable than Joe Duffy. I think he puts his combinations together really intelligently, but his footwork and his head movement, these things are just not really anywhere near the par of Joe Duffy. He makes up for that by being a much harder hitter, being probably one of the heaviest punchers in the lightweight division, which is pretty impressive considering that he was fighting at featherweight for a good many years. But we both picked Joe Duffy. Does the fact that Duffy was flash KO'd in training a week before their originally scheduled fight change your pick at all?
Absolutely not. The betting line for this fight is much closer to where I thought it should be, as opposed to their first matchup, or when they were first scheduled to meet. I suppose they're for this one, Duffy is minus 190. I think he was at like minus 260.
It was in Dublin last time too.
That was way too high.
It was in Dublin last time too. I think there was maybe a lot of local betting going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just think in general, the difference here is Duffy's precision. I just think he's a much more precise striker who does the little things much better. He has much better head movement. He takes much tighter pivots and angles. He's fought a lot of southpaws, and he's very willing to jab a southpaw, which I think is a really interesting and important thing. I think it's going to be really key here in this matchup against Dustin Poirier, a fighter who does not necessarily fight at long distance very well. I think that this is mostly, especially over 3 rounds. If it were 5 rounds, Poirier's power would give me some pause here, just because more opportunities to land those shots.
Right.
But over 3 rounds, this strikes me as a really defined stick and move for a Sahabi kind of game plan.
I agree. The three round thing it makes it more favorable for Duffy, in my opinion. And like I said, I already picked him the first time. On the note of him getting knocked out in sparring, I think a lot of people tend to question. There's this very pervasive belief that a chin just goes away once it's cracked. And I don't really think that's true. Like we said, Robbie Lawler KO'd by Nick Diaz on a pretty light right hook, maybe even mostly a jab, way back at the start of his career, still known as one of the most durable fighters in the game. Carlos Condit was knocked down 4 or 5 times by Jake Ellenberger. Couldn't be put away, but he was hurt a lot in that fight. One of the hardest guys to hurt in the sport. Gegard Mousasi knocked out by Uriah Faber. Jose Aldo knocked out in 13 seconds by Conor McGregor. Anderson Silva knocked out by a relatively delicate tap on the chin from Chris Weidman. Fighters with great chins get knocked out. It happens. Everybody can be hitting the button and put away. It doesn't really give me any realistic reason to question Joe Duffy's chin or wonder if he'll be more vulnerable to Poirier's power than I thought he was, just by virtue of the fact that a freak occurrence happened and he was knocked out in sparring.
Especially because if it really was like a flash knockdown in sparring, that's the kind of thing where you get knocked down in an actual fight. You're a little wobbly, but you probably manage to work your way back to your feet and recover.
Well, as I heard, it was a flash knockout.
Oh, a flash knockout. Oh,
that's
okay,
what
yeah,
I heard. It's been a lot of rumors. That's what I heard. Which even in that case, you look at Jose Aldo after the McGregor knockout, he was fine pretty shortly afterwards. He wasn't battered a lot. One touch on the chin, lights went out, and he woke back up.
Yeah, it happens. Like it's certainly happened to me before. I ducked into a knee. Next thing I knew, I was kind of on my back, but apparently only a second or two had passed.
Sure.
It's a thing that happens, but no, it doesn't really change my perception of this fight, especially because Poirier is not the world's most durable guy himself in that perspective. Like, Poirier's been knocked down and put out himself.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been staggered in many of his fights. He's the harder hitter, but he's also the more hittable. So it may be a pretty even exchange in that regard. And then I just think that we both agree Duffy's got a little more science to his entire boxing game, and then add in his submission grappling. It's still a great matchup, a fantastic lightweight matchup. I'm really looking forward to it.
Probably the best fight ever on Fight Pass.
It is the best. It's the best. Well, maybe not, because there have been some good main events.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
But it's certainly the best Fight Pass prelim ever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly what they're billing it as, the best Fight Pass prelim ever.
Yeah, I saw that.
I don't know what that means. Like that's very strange.
It is kind of like a backhanded compliment in a way.
It's like being the world's tallest midget. Like, all respect to the little people out there.
The world's tallest congenital dwarf. It's still not a. It almost sounds less complimentary in that phrasing. So yeah, it's kind of weird, but it's a great fight. How about Lorenz Larkin versus Albert Tumanov? Quick breakdown of that one.
Oh my God, what a fight! I lean toward Tumanov pretty heavily in this one.
Yeah.
I looked at the betting odds, and I initially thought, wow, that seems pretty steep, because I think Tumanov's coming in at about minus 240. But after thinking about it a little bit, I'm with that. Larkin is faster. for sure. But I think that Tumenov has a lot more craft to his game and a lot more options. And I think that he is a spectacularly bad matchup in the striking realm for Larkin.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that Larkin is still faster after having gone down 2 weight classes from his original light heavyweight. And his speed was always a huge advantage for him there. He's still probably one of the fastest welterweights in the division. He's lightning quick.
Crazy fast.
Yeah, he absolutely is. But from a technical standpoint, he still does a lot of things that are almost like pet peeves of mine. His willingness to get backed into the fence. He doesn't have that tight, efficient footwork that I've been talking about so much recently. He's more of the Junior Dos Santos, where he'll just take these big loping steps and just get backed into the fence. Doesn't know how to close the distance and move off very well. Tends to pull his head straight back a lot, even when he's against the fence, so he's still hittable. Just plants his feet, irrespective of foot position. A lot of these things that I just think will really hinder him against Albert Tumenov, who is just a beautiful fighter in transitions, changes of distance and phase. He's always sneaking in strikes and takedowns and things right in the midst of these. If you're backing away from him, his punches, a head kick might be coming up after that. If you're closing the distance or changing levels, an uppercut's going to be coming. If you are defending punches up high, a quick takedown's going to happen. He's just a brilliant transitional fighter and a blast to watch. Really technical, really dangerous. I think he might knock Lorenz out.
Yeah, I picked Tumenov by knockout in this fight for exactly that reason. Larkin is one of those fighters, to come back to something that we were talking about earlier, who has neither good footwork nor good movement. In the sense that he confuses moving a lot with moving well and moving effectively. And that's not the case. Like, especially since he moved to welterweight, he's moved a lot. He's been consistently circling, consistently moving, and that's helped him to some extent in terms of finding angles to land his strikes and finding the right places to launch these blitzing, forward-moving attacks that are just spectacular to watch, like really, really awesome to watch. But his movement defensively is terrible. It's downright bad. And as you pointed out, Connor, he's terrible about moving straight back toward the fence. That's how he got knocked out by Costas Philippou, among other, and how he's found himself in trouble a whole bunch of times over the course of his career. He's got all the physical tools. He's an incredible offensive fighter. Some of the combinations that he strings together moving forward are like Nate Marquardt, the Tekken combinations. Like they're awesome. He does some incredible things. And when he gets uncorked, when he finds his rhythm, he's a really awesome offensive striker. He's drastically improved his jab since he moved down to 170 pounds. But the defensive problems are still there. Like, a lot of the time after he throws or as he's throwing, his chin is straight up in the air and he doesn't pull his hands back to his chin. A guy who's as sharp a counterpuncher as Albert Tumenov is going to find those holes and find them with a quickness.
Yeah, absolutely. I disagree. I agree with every bit of that. I think that's spot on. Albert Tumenov, man, just a pleasure to watch.
He's a special fighter, man. He's really special.
Definitely. Okay, so before we wrap things up, we've got a couple of questions here from our listeners, so we will get to those straight away. And these are a couple of questions from our Patreon contributors, our patrons, our pledgers, if you will. If you guys want your questions answered on the show, we will, of course, be taking a look at just normally curated questions still from time to time, but we give precedence to questions from people who have contributed $5 or more to the show, and these are from 2 people who contributed $5 or more in November. So our first one comes to us from Justin Wilson, and Justin asks, what is the best solo work someone can do? Justin is currently attending CWU in the drive to Yakima. Is it Yakima? Yakima. So sorry. So sorry, Pat. Where is Yakima?
Yakima is in Central Washington. It's my hometown. He's currently attending Central Washington University, where shouts to Central. I poured the concrete in the Student Union building there many years ago.
What a blue-collar man you are, Pat Wyman.
Yeah, but so Justin has just been cleared from injury and would like to sharpen his striking. He has an 8x8 mat space and access to a heavy bag. So, Connor, what are your suggestions here? What do you got?
I think for solo work, I think that the thing with solo work that's so hard to get past is that, because obviously you need partner drills, you need sparring, both light, medium, and heavy. You need to interact with other people to learn to fight. So solo work is really the time to start refining muscle memory and techniques. You're not going to be able to refine your reactions to things, but you can start getting your technique as perfect as possible. And I think it's really difficult to do that because when you don't have a coach there keeping you on track, someone watching over you to make you feel guilty about quitting or messing around, it's really easy to do whatever is the most fun, right? It's really easy to just throw all kinds of crazy shit on the heavy bag and go nuts. And you're like, I'm tired. I'm going to take a 2-minute break between rounds because you went too hard. You didn't really moderate your energy expenditure. I think boring stuff, for lack of a better term, is some of the best you can do while you're working by yourself. Specifically, I think shadow boxing is hugely important. I think shadow boxing in phases is a great drill. Personally, I like to shadow box to rhythmic music so I can work on trying to work on a rhythm, and then I can take that into the next round and try to break rhythm after I'm establishing it. So I'll go with like some hip hop or like some Latin music, like cumbia and stuff like that. I think that is fantastic for working on a very specific aspect of your game that is probably not going to be addressed in a lot of gyms that you go to. And I think shadowboxing in phases, and what I mean by that is doing a round of shadowboxing where it's just footwork. You keep your hands in a defensive position and you just move your feet. And then you'll move your feet and add in your head movement, and then you'll add in your punches off of that for the next round. And it's difficult to force yourself to do these things. I know I have trouble doing it because it's just not as fun as wailing away in a heavy bag if you've got access to one. But it's, I think, the most valuable kind of stuff you can do when you're on your own.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially shadowboxing. I mean, I think shadowboxing is the most important part of your training regimen that gets probably the least attention.
Yeah.
I try and shadowbox at least 9 minutes every day just to try and stay as sharp as possible. And I think it's the most helpful thing because it's when you get to work on your mechanics. More than anything else, you get to work on those little subtle things that so often you don't really get a focus on when you're in a group class or even when you're in a one-on-one session with a trainer. Yeah. Like those just are not things that you really get to work on all that much. Like for me, especially, I like to work on my adjustment steps. So as I like just go march across a room, throwing punches and working on keeping your feet moving in front of you. I think especially for working on counterpunching footwork, I think shadowboxing is the most effective thing that you can do. Working on your pull counters, working on your backstepping punches, working on things like stepping to the inside angle as you throw a punch for an opposite stance counter. Things like that are just your shadowboxing is when you get the chance to work on them. Footwork for check hooks. Things of that nature, like that's the best time to work on them. So mark out that time for yourself to do that. When you're working the heavy bag too, I think it's important to go in there with a plan and not just to hit the bag. Right? Yeah. So say, okay, for this first 3-minute round or 5-minute round or whatever you're going to do, I want to work on my cross. So throw 100 crosses in a row, throw 100 left hooks in a row or whatever it is. Or throw 50 kicks just to work on your technique, just to work on your mechanics and make sure that you've got it right.
Yeah, and another way to work on, I mentioned rhythmic shadowboxing, another way to work on kind of more intangible mechanics is a fun drill that I have from a boxing trainer by the name of Dadias Thorson, who's been on the show before, way back in its infancy. And what Dadi does for his fighters is he has them... he has a little algorithm actually, I think, where he just randomizes it and it randomizes the numbers. And so each round will have a different format. For example, one round will be 2 left-handed punches and then you'll have a randomly assigned type of punch. So it might be it might be body jab, left hook to the head, or body jab, left uppercut to the body, any random assortment. And if you can write these things down and have a reference before you do a round on the heavy bag, you're going to get some really awkward combinations of punches, but it really helps with your fluidity of being able to punch organically and throw new things after one another as if you're adjusting to openings that are in front of you. You know, like throwing 2 right hands in a row or throwing a right hand to the body and then a straight right upstairs. These are weird combinations of punches that you don't typically train on the pads or with partners, but it can be really useful to have them in your arsenal. So stuff like that. You can still keep it creative and fun, but try to go into everything with a goal, with a very clear goal in mind of what you're going to be working on, and then stick to it. That's the hardest part for me, and probably for a lot of people. Stick to it, give yourself a regimen, and don't quit early. Don't take longer breaks than you should. Moderate your energy as best you can, and go all the way through the workout. And our next question comes to us from Jorge Cabrera. Jorge asks, how to avoid getting countered by punches after landing kicks or knees to the body. He came up with this question, Pat, after seeing his countryman Cesar Arzamendia getting blasted at UFC Fight Night Gastelum versus Magny. He went for, and I remember this knockout, it was pretty brutal. He went for a knee to the body, got clipped as he was setting his foot down, so he didn't have both feet planted, which is the real danger of kicking someone in punching range, especially using kicks to counter someone. Really dangerous to have one foot off the ground and compromise your balance. Arzamendia got knocked out right after landing that kick. And he's wondering how to throw body kicks or leg kicks or knees without getting countered right afterwards.
So this is a huge, huge pet peeve of mine in MMA that I think we see. It's actually to the extent that it's a market inefficiency within the sport that like more coaches would be better off spending more time drilling just counters to low and body kicks. The key to staying safe during those things, if you're the fighter throwing them, is to do two things. First of all, you have to pull your head offline as you throw. You can't just keep your head upright on the center line as you throw a kick and expect that to work out real well for you. You have to pull your head off to the side as you throw it. And so, stepping into it helps. Stepping into a kick naturally takes your head off that center line. But you can just pull your head to the side too. You kind of scrunch your abs, not back, but to the side as you're throwing, but to the side and maybe even a little bit forward as you're throwing it. As long as your head is off that center line, you will have done wonders to make yourself more safe. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you can do is it's generally a given that you're going to chop the hand on the kicking side down to add some power to the shot. But instead of dropping both hands as you throw the kick, which is something we see a lot of in MMA, or keeping the non-kicking side hand up next to that ear, bring that hand in front of your face, kind of to guard your face, kind of across. So
I could hear you miming it as you were describing it.
Yeah. So let's say you're kicking with your right leg, your right hand comes across if you're kicking with your right leg, your left hand comes across your face. Your left hand ends up next to your ear, with your forearm blocking your chin.
It's one half of a cross-armed guard.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can still chop to add power to the kick, and ideally you're pulling your head offline too, but you've now built in two lines of defense to that counter punch.
And that's the advantage of a cross-armed guard over the typical double forearm guard, is that you have something blocking the line of the center of your head. If you bring your forearm, palm out, across to the other side of your cheek, your elbow, your forearm, your shoulder, and your palm are protecting basically every part of your jaw. So I agree with that. When it comes to knees, too, I think an underrated aspect of avoiding being countered is, first of all, you have to have the right timing as you come in. You have to try to attack when they're not in a position or get a reaction out of them that's going to take them out of position to counter you. But you can enhance that by checking hands as you throw a knee. I think a lot of fighters just come in and personally, this is one of those times when I think it'd be better to have your hands on your opponent than it would be to be keeping a tight guard to your face if you're throwing a knee. Because if you're just letting them have that distance and holding your hands up, there's still all kinds of openings in a typical guard. In any kind of guard, there's ways to get around it. And so I think it's better to have some kind of modicum of control of their posture and or their hands so that you're compromising their ability to attack you as you're throwing your knee.
Even just extending that hand outwards as you throw the knee is going to add a line of defense. The worst thing that you can do is just to drop your hands as you throw the knee. And this is what we see, I think, most of the time in MMA as guys throw that is just, I'm throwing the knee, so who cares what my opponent's doing? And and that's how Arzamendia got countered. So I think that extending your hand is the best. That's the way I was.
Give them something they can't just walk through. At least give them something to avoid if they're going to try and counter you.
Or worst case scenario, maybe you poke them in the eye, which use your fouls. That's the sport.
You get one cage grab, one groin shot, and one eye poke each fight. Use them.
Yeah, exactly. But alternatively, if you're not going to do that, at least keep a tight guard as you're doing it. Or use that cross arm guard again. Chop the hand down on the kneeing side. But bring the other hand across your face and guard.
When you have only 1 foot on the ground and one leg mostly extended, no spring left in your body, and you're extending, coming close to the opponent for a short range knee, there's pretty much nothing worse you can do in that situation than just dropping your hands. and leaving yourself open.
You can also do kind of more of a Thai style thing. I learned this in a seminar with John Wayne Parr, is instead of throwing the knee straight down the middle, you throw it almost in the same arc as you're going to throw a body kick.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're chopping both hands down as you're throwing the knee, but you can pull your head off line the same way you would as you were throwing a kick.
And you can use the chopping motion of the hand as also a side clinch collar tie.
Yeah,
like a cross-face collar tie and grab them into it.
Exactly, same deal. So you end up throwing the knee almost parallel to the ground at that angle.
I like those knees best. I find those to be the most powerful.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of them. I had never learned to throw them before that seminar. It was really, really useful. But yeah, so that's kind of what I got there.
Yeah, I think that's about it. So thank you guys for your questions. If anybody else has contributed $5 or more to the show and has not yet sent in questions, please do that on Patreon as soon as possible. We really want to address all of your guys' interests and concerns and queries. And then, of course, we've got other rewards you guys can check out all the way up to $20. If you pledge $20 a month or more, you can pick an entire segment for an episode. Rather than just a heavy bag question, you can basically give us an entire topic of discussion, and we will break it down in depth to as best we can, the way we did some of the fights this evening. So thank you guys for your continued contributions. We hope you're appreciating the answers and everything and enjoying the show. Welcome to all of the new listeners we picked up with the Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor fights that happened recently. We hope you are enjoying the show as well. And that about does it for us. Before we wrap up, do you have anything to tell people about, Pat?
Only a preview of UFC 195 coming out on Bleacher Report this week. That's all I got. What are you doing, Connor?
I've got the same thing coming out on Sherdog. Got my full fight breakdown preview. We'll see where we disagree on our predictions. We tend to be pretty much in line with each other, which is nice. We're such good friends, Pat. We have a connection between us.
I don't think it's a coincidence that our thinking tends to mirror each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's true. That's why we get along on this show, probably. I also have a thing that was in the works way after Lawler McDonald 2. Kind of a very in-depth narrative literary thing combined with technical breakdown. A long-form piece, basically, as it stands in its current draft form. It's about 12 pages long. So I think I'm going to try to publish that this week. A retrospective of Lawler McDonald going through what was probably one of the best fights in MMA history. One of the most dramatic and one of the hardest to watch, too. Really complex engagement there. And then if I have time, something about how maybe Condit can beat Lawler or something like that. But I won't make any promises because I always tend to promise too much. But hopefully that'll come out sometime this week. Once again, thank you everybody for listening to today's episode. We're looking forward to the fights. We hope you are too. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.